Today, with the rising population and the developmental needs that we have, the consumerism culture that's around, and also the disaster that we see, all of these are put together, we are confronting a critical challenge of this entire era, we can say. So, this challenge is about us maintaining a delicate balance between the environmental conservation as well as the economic development. So this debate is just not about some mere intellectual exercise, but we have to think from within ourselves, that is the introspection about our responsibilities towards the planet as well as the future generations. So in this video, we are going to have a discussion about all these contents. These are all the contents we are going to cover. So the first thing that we are going to cover is going to be related to economic growth and development, what this is all about. What is the importance of environment? Then we have, if we do reckless development, what is going to be the impact? And then the committees, some of the committees and the recommendations regarding how to maintain this environmental conservation along with the economic development. How can they go hand in hand? And some of the legislations, key legislations, especially in India, that have been passed in order to ensure that sustainable development happens. So it has been happening for the last 40, 50 years. And some of the judgments passed by the judiciary, and also some important cases that have happened in India related to environment. Further, what are the challenges to the implementation of the law, the legislations, the rules, and their implementation? How difficult is it? And then the ethics of conservation and development. So the ethical aspect to environmental conservation is something which we are going to look into. And finally, the closing remarks, the conclusion part. So we'll start with the first topic, economic growth and development. So what is this all about? The economic growth and development. So economic growth is something which is rather indispensable for the human progress. That's what we can say. To lift the societies out of poverty, to provide some essential services even, and also to innovate, to foster innovation, we need economic growth. So economic growth is basically, it is essential for human progress is what we can say. And the second thing is it provides some essential services and then the job creation as well. So it ensures job creation. At the same time, we can say human capital development is also possible because of this. We generate more revenue, tax revenue, improved infrastructure is there, right? Infrastructure development. In social sectors like your health, education, skill development. So as well as in industrial sector, the infrastructure development is possible overall, leading to an inclusive development, which is all possible because of what? The economic growth itself. This is the one which ensures better connectivity and equitable distribution of resources. All of this is just because of economic growth and development. Coming to the technological advancements as well. Development leads to technological innovation that facilitates human development and at the same time social progress. For example, India's advancements in renewable energy technology, particularly through the National Solar Mission, underlines the commitment we have towards sustainable development. And the next thing is inclusive growth. Speaking of inclusive growth or inclusive development, what is this all about? It just means that the economic growth that is going to create some equitable opportunities for everyone and helps in reducing the poverty to a lower level, which can be achieved by just some holistic projects, developmental projects all around the world. So, without the socio-economic and technological development, inclusive development is not possible. So, these are all the things that we get because of economic growth and development. Now, coming to the importance of environment, that is the next topic. So, what is the importance of environment? The first thing is biodiversity. See, a diverse range of species ensures that the ecosystem has some resilience and it has some stability. So, because of the biodiversity, the ecosystem functions like, the pollination, the pest control, the nutrients recycling. All these are happening because of the biodiversity, which are all vital for the sustaining of food production, at the same time the entire natural habitat. The second thing is climate change, or we can say climate regulation. The natural environments, for example, you have the forests, you have the oceans, you have the wetlands, you have the mountains. All these play a very critical role in maintaining the global climate pattern. So they absorb the greenhouse gases such as your carbon dioxide and help us mitigate the climate change impacts. And basically the overall climate system, the earth's climate system, has been stabilized because of the existence of what? The environment. The third thing is something which is directly beneficial or directly useful, direct utility for the human beings. This is the cultural and recreational value. So the landscapes that we see, the wonderful landscapes that we see, the biodiversity that we have, it all contributes to the cultural identities, the traditions, the spiritual practices that are there across the world, across cultures, you can see that. So all these provide the opportunities for some sort of enjoyment, recreation, tourism, at the same time, aesthetic enjoyment. So it enriches our human lives and kind of promotes the well-being at a mental level. Thirdly, you have the economic benefits. Most of the industries that we have today, be it the agriculture industry, the fisheries, the forestry, the tourism industry, they all heavily rely on the environment. So environmental degradation can actually lead to the reduced productivity, increased costs, and the losses, which are mostly economic, monetary. So thus it clearly emphasizes the importance of sustainable resource management. Right? We have to do sustainable resource management. This is very, very important. And finally, there are ethical considerations as well. So many cultures across the world, several cultures across the world, and various ethical frameworks developed by various philosophers recognize the intrinsic value of environment, of the nature, and they clearly advocate for the conservation based on the principle of, respect to the biodiversity, intergenerational equity. So protecting the environment is seen as a moral obligation by many cultures and also many philosophies, so that the well-being of all the living beings, the humans and animals alike, the well-being is ensured in the future as well as for the future generations. So this is about the importance of what? The environment. The next thing is related to impact of irresponsible development. This is about reckless development. What will happen if reckless development happens? Of course, the first thing is the frequent disasters. So, why do these happen? The frequent disasters. It is mostly because of developmental projects like the infrastructure projects involving earth mining, mountain, cracking, breaking down the mountains, cutting the rivers, building dams. So all these have increased the intensity of damage that we are doing to the nature. So, for example, extreme rainfall events have been witnessed in the recent years, especially. So, we saw the fury of the Himachal Pradesh floods in 2023, and urban flooding keeps happening in cities like Chennai and Hyderabad. So, this has been a regular event that happens every year now. The second thing is it leads to increase in the pollution levels. So reckless development leads to increasing pollution. So one of the major concerns which is associated with the development is it causes all kinds of pollution. It's not just one kind of pollution. So as per one particular data called Air Quality Life Index, Quality Life Index, it's a report for 2023 by the University of Chicago Energy Policy Institute. University of Chicago 2023 report. According to this report, Energy Policy Institute, according to this report, air pollution shortens the lives of residents of Delhi by around 11.9 years. That's huge. So that is a second thing, the pollution. Thirdly, you have the environmental degradation. So because the nature is free, we often take it for granted and we overexploit it. So developmental activities have caused a lot of habitat loss and degradation, due to the issues like deforestation, human animal conflict, and the diseases. They have increased because of the over exploitation we are doing and the environmental degradation that is happening with it. And can't stress more about this particular point, which is global warming. This is one of the most prominent issues that the world faces today. While some of the countries or politicians may brush aside climate change, but today it is climate change which is a prominent issue, and it has been triggered by global warming. Rapid industrialization and the release of excessive GHGs, that is your greenhouse gases, GHGs, have contributed to this global warming. So this is the outcome of irresponsible development. Now, in order to deal with the irresponsible development and the negative impacts it's going to have on humans and the society as a whole and the environment, several committees and their recommendations ought to be taken into consideration so that this problem can be resolved, a balance can be maintained. So let's see what the committees and their recommendations have been over the years. So you have the UN Brundtland Commission. This is the first commission we are going to talk about, of 1987. So this commission put forward an idea of close association between environment and economic activities. So later on it was followed up by environmental accounting, so that a debate was spurred in sustainable development, and it led to what we today have, the famous Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. the famous Rio Summit in 1992. It led in the culmination of this commission and its findings and its advocacy led to the Rio Summit of 1992. It's called the Earth Summit, the famous Earth Summit. And next we have the Mishra Committee, which also spoke about the balance of 1976. So this committee reported that the Joshimath in Uttarakhand lies on a deposit of sand and stone, not on the main rock. So no new construction should be undertaken in this zone, according to the Mishra Committee. Again, emphasizing why is it important for us to ensure that a balance is maintained, at the same time development happens by taking into consideration the environmental features. Next comes the Kasturi Rangan Committee, which again spoke of, this is a very famous committee in 2012. It recommended that the conserving and protecting of biodiversity of Western Ghats. So while we do that, while we allow the sustainable and inclusive development of the region, we have to allow some sort of development as well there. So the committee recommended bringing just 37% of Western Ghats under the ecologically sensitive zones. So ESA, 37% of it, economically sensitive area, ESA zones. Next came the TSR Subramaniam Committee, 2014. So this committee was appointed to review and suggest any amendments to the existing environmental laws. So the committee, after going into all the laws, recommended that we have to streamline the regulatory processes. We have to increase the transparency, enhance the transparency. We have to strengthen the enforcement mechanisms to ensure that environmental governance is very effective. And finally, you have the K.S. Radhakrishnan Committee of 2018. It was formed mainly to address the issue of solid waste management in India. So the committee focused on strategies to improve waste management practices, promotion of recycling, and reduce environmental pollution caused by improper waste disposal. So basically this was about waste management. Okay, solid waste management. So the recommendations actually was about promoting sustainable living practices. Sustainable living practices. This is what it was about. So this is about the committees and the recommendations that have happened in the recent past related to environment. Now, the next one is related to the key environmental legislations in India. So the first one is the Environmental Protection Act of 1986. This is the first one. So even before that, you had the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, 1981. Even before that, you had the Water Pollution Control Act, Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, 1974. And then before that, you have the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. And later you have the Forest Conservation Act, and this is the latest, National Green Tribunal Act. So the EPA of 1986 was a direct result. This one was a direct result of the Bhopal gas tragedy. It was a direct outcome of it. So, which was also a disaster of chemical leakages that showed significant deficiencies in the India's law regarding environmental regulation. So this is a cross-cutting act that provides a lot of powers to the central government in relation to the measures to protect and improve the environment as well as control industrial pollutants. So the EPA allows the government to come up with standards for air, water, soil, the quality of it, to maintain that. The government can create standards. It sets a limit on dangerous materials, the control of waste disposal. It also allows that for quick response in case of environmental catastrophes. So that is your EPA. So Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1981. This is one of the first major acts targeting the air pollution in India. So this law was also recognized, this law also recognized the adverse impacts of emission from industrial and motor vehicles especially. So it also provides a regulatory mechanism to follow and control air pollution all over India. So it defines the air quality standards, and this is the one which led to the establishment of central and state pollution control boards. So the famous central and state pollution control boards, so CPCB and SPCB, state pollution control boards. It's because of this. The next one is Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974. So this was the first comprehensive law that regulates water pollution and protection of water bodies. So it's also about the protection of water bodies. So the purpose is to preserve and rehabilitation of the purity. So preservation and the rehabilitation of the purity of the bodies of water. So it explicitly prohibits discharge of pollutants into the water bodies beyond a permissible limit. So it established the state and central pollution control boards, and it provides for penalties for non-compliance. And then you have the Wildlife Protection Act. So it was basically for the safeguarding of wildlife and stop the trend of poaching that was quite prevalent back then. The illegal trade, destruction of habitats. So this particular act earmarks protected areas, as well as protected areas in the sense you have the national parks, the wildlife sanctuaries. So it earmarks all these areas, and it also provides for a strong punishments for hunting endangered species. So this is the act that institutes the national parks, the sanctuaries, the conservation reserves, and it clearly lays down the classification of species into different schedules with differential protection. As in, you have the endangered species, critically endangered species, all of it is instituted, laid down. The classification is laid down by this particular act. So the next one, that is the Wildlife Protection Act. The next one is Forest Conservation Act. So this act of 1980 was enacted to control or to put an end to deforestation and regulate that aspect where the diversion of forest land for non-forest purposes was happening. So this was the underlying objective, right? So that conservation of India's forests happens. The act clearly states that the permission of the central government is a must for conservation of forest land for use for any purpose other than forest, mainly for industrial and developmental projects. So the act also has some provisions for compensatory afforestation. So the steps taken, compensatory afforestation. So the steps that have been taken till date have helped save some areas from indiscriminate deforestation, but questions still exist over its implementation and the results that we are getting regarding the developmental pressures and the problems the indigenous communities, that is the tribals who live in the forest areas, face. The last act is the National Green Tribunal Act of 2010. So, with this act, the NGTs, the National Green Tribunals, were empowered. It was empowered. The National Green Tribunal was empowered to provide specialized forum for effective disposal and quick disposal of any given environmental protection or forest conservation matters. So it has the authority to try the cases of environmental damage, protect the legal rights associated with the environment, and punish those who create environmental pollution. So it is a fast track procedure for cases related to environmental litigation. So this has been the key institution for the implementation of all the environmental laws given, and it has given verdicts on several landmark issues, landmark judgments it has given, particularly concerning the industrial pollution and as well as illegal mining in the recent past. So there are some weaknesses, weak resources provided to NGT and the procedural delays that come with it. It has somewhat weakened the effectiveness of the idea of NGT. So now that we have spoken about NGT, we'll look at what the judiciary has done as a whole over the years. So judiciary's role and the important cases. So first thing is about the public interest litigation. So the judiciary has been entertaining, both at the high court levels as well as the Supreme Court level, public interest litigation cases. So this entertainment of PIL has sort of revolutionized the environmental law enforcement in India. So it has enabled the citizens, the NGOs, as well as some activists to approach the court directly by bypassing all these bureaucratic obstacles, the maze that you have to go through to get environmental justice. So this mechanism has sort of, we can say, democratized. It has sort of democratized the access to judiciary to such an extent that it has made unrepresented groups' views heard by the courts on those issues that usually gets otherwise, they don't get any sort of limelight. Further, the judiciary has also expanded. The Indian courts have expanded the environmental rights by reinterpreting the Constitution article. We are talking about article number 21. So it guarantees the right to life. So it has made the right to clean, the courts have made the right to a clean and healthy environment a fundamental right under article 21. Such interpretation has been used to file a lot of PILs to get redressal for the environmental harm, whether it is pollution or deforestation or wildlife and natural resource protection. So it has basically expanded the meaning of Article 21. So when we look at the cases, the first case we are going to look at is the Narmada Bachao Andolan versus Union of India case of 2000. So this issue was related to the construction of Sardar Sarovar Dam on the Narmada River. So the main contention was that the displacement of local communities and submergence of the forests was on the one side. The other side was the developmental aspect, which was related to irrigation and power generation and provision of drinking water supply. So finally, the judgment of the Supreme Court allowed the construction, but emphasized the proper rehabilitation of all the communities which had been impacted. And also it said compliance with all the environmental safeguards should be met, should be there. So the importance of this particular case was that it raised the awareness about the impact of large scale developmental projects on not just the environment as well as the local communities. Another famous case was MC Mehta versus Union of India case. It was a 1988 case related to Ganga river. So it's famously called the Ganga pollution case. So the issue is about industrial pollution in Ganga river. So on the one side you have industrial development, the other side, industrial development and the economic benefits you get from it, versus the right to clean water and preservation of the environment. So the judgment was given by the Supreme Court. It directed the industries near the Ganga river to install pollution control measures, and if they are not able to do it, relocate. The significance of this particular case was that it strengthened the principle that economic development must always be balanced with environmental conservation. The next one is T.N. Godavarman Tirumulpad versus versus Union of India, a 1996 case. Okay. Again, this was about the protection of forests. So this was about river Ganga. This was about the protection of forests and the prevention of deforestation. And the Supreme Court imposed heavy restrictions on deforestation in its judgment, and it clearly directed the compliance with the Forest Conservation Act of 1980, FCA, Forest Conservation Act of 1980. Now, so this is the case which made way for sustainable forestry practices and better enforcement of environmental laws. Then there is a latest case, Sterlite Industries case. It is 2018 case. So it is about the closure of a copper smelting plant in Tamil Nadu due to the pollution concerns. So of course, if there is a plant, you are going to get the economic benefits from it. And on the other hand, there is environmental degradation and the health impact to the local communities. The Supreme Court clearly said, you have to close the plant, citing that there are a lot of environmental violations. So this was your Sterlite Industries case. And then you have the Chardham project case of 2021. This is one more recent case. So it is about the widening of roads for the Chardham pilgrimage in Uttarakhand. So on the one side you have development for religious tourism and defense purposes. On the other hand, you have deforestation, landslides and the ecological harm. The Supreme Court in its judgment said that you can go ahead with the project, but stressed you have to adhere to all the environmental guidelines. So again, showcasing the need for balancing of infrastructure projects for the sake of development with that of ecological preservation. RE Forest case 2019. This is one more case. This is about the felling of trees, right, in the Mumbai's RE forest area for having a metro car shed. So the conflict was about providing, creating new urban infrastructure for developmental purposes versus the loss of biodiversity and the urban green cover. So the Supreme Court halted the tree felling, emphasized the need to protect the green spaces, especially in urban areas where you see the maximum pollution happening, and also where there is a lot of health impact because of what, the felling of the trees. Green cover becomes more important in urban areas. Next, you have the Goa Foundation versus Union of India case. It is a 2014 case. It is about illegal mining activities in Goa. On the one side, you have the revenue generation, the employment creation because of the mining. On the other hand, you have the environmental degradation. So the Supreme Court clearly said, illegal mining cannot be allowed, and mentioned that you have to establish proper environmental safeguards. So this was what the Goa Foundation versus Union of India case from 2014. And next you have the oleum gas leak case of 1986. So this was about the industrial operations in Delhi, which was causing a lot of environmental harm. The Supreme Court introduced the concept of what is known as absolute liability in this case. The concept of absolute liability in this particular case for industries which are involved in hazardous activities. So it set a precedent, this particular case, for holding industries accountable for any environmental damage they do. So some of the doctrines and the principles which are established by the honorable courts include one polluter pays principle. This is one. So it means that those causing pollution, polluter pays is one principle. So those causing environmental pollution should bear the cost of managing and mitigating the damage. So this principle has been frequently applied by one court after the other to ensure that the industries and individuals responsible for polluting have to pay a financial cost. The second one is precautionary principle. Precautionary principle. So this is about, since the environmental damage is irreversible, the Supreme Court had to, at the behest of precautionary principle, accept precautionary action in face of some uncertain risk born out of some scientific experiments or some science related projects. This doctrine clearly requires the authorities to take some proactive measures to act in a precautionary manner so that uncertain risks are prevented to the environment. The third one is public trust doctrine. Public trust doctrine. So according to this doctrine, the government is a trustee of all natural resources which have the inherent characteristics of being a public property. So courts have held that the government has a responsibility to protect and conserve such resources for public use, and it cannot be allowed to get exploited for private interests. So these are the three principles and doctrines established by what? The Indian courts. Next. So what are the challenges to the enforcement and implementation? So the first one is inadequate institutional capacity. So most of the institutions related to the environmental agencies, such as your CP, that is Central Pollution Control Board, or the State Pollution Control Boards, face shortage of resources, especially the manpower, right? And they do not have adequate strength of the staff. They don't have training. that is why it limits the ability of these institutions to go ahead with regular inspections, monitoring, enforcement activities become very difficult. The second thing is bureaucratic inefficiency. So, in order to implement the environmental laws, uh, there is generally a slow pace, right? It is slowed down by bureaucratic delays, red tape. So, the bureaucratic delays, the red tape. So, if an action has to be taken, it has to go through, various offices, and there are, the regulatory procedures themselves are complex. So, such inefficiency may delay any of the actions that are necessary, which are urgent actions that are to be taken in order to protect the environment. So, be it issuing the permits, enforcement of penalties against the violators, or any corrective action that is to be suggested and carried out, all these take time because of the bureaucratic inefficiency. Third one is slow judicial process and ineffective implementation of court orders. So the judiciary in India has provided, a lot of uh, push to protect the environment, but there is a slowdown in the judicial procedures, and this acts as a, you know sort of a, thumb, which is not allowing for, the judicial process to go on with a lot of effect. So it takes years and more for the cases to get passed, and allows violators to further indulge in illegal activities, and it kind of undermines the deterrent effect of all the legal actions. So the court orders also, they pass the orders to implement these various environmental regulations or to punish the violators. So the court orders are not often implemented, or they get delayed in implementation. So that is the next thing. And you have corruption and lobbying. So if the environmental laws can be undermined by powerful industrial lobbies and vested interests, then, it would not be taken seriously. Corruption in regulatory agencies, that, include the neglect of uh, enforcement for some form of compensation or some political favor, sort of erodes the environmental governance that is there. And next, you have the lack of public awareness and participation. Most people are unaware of environmental laws, their benefits, as well as the penalties for violating them. So most industries and individuals are really unaware of what environmental regulations apply to them, or what are the penalties that are involved. So this lack of environmental literacy is widespread, and as most people disregard environment norms. And then you have the success of any law enforcement, be it environment or otherwise, would depend on public involvement, and whether the community is ready to accept it, act accordingly or not. So in many areas, the communities do not have enough resources or the legal strength to influence the local authorities to take actions against environmental abuses. So further, we have the environmental versus developmental objectives. This is about the conflicts that arise in terms of land use on issues related to resource allocation, between the developmental projects in form of highways, dams, factories, versus the need to conserve the natural resources. So in many instances, such conflicts result in compromising the implementation of environmental law, making way for developmental projects. Say, for example, illegal mining and your encroachment. So, be it illegal mining, deforestation, and encroachments, and these are widespread in many parts of the country because of the requirement of natural resources. So, while the government has passed several laws for protecting wildlife sanctuaries and the forests and biodiversity, the enforcing process is not effective. and it is at a very remote and a vulnerable stage, and hence takes place almost it all these deforestation and everything takes place almost unregulated at any time. So given these concerns, we have to look at the ethics behind the conservation and development. So why we have to conserve the environment, right? How to balance this, why we should be balancing these things. First thing is about the ecological values and the greenwashing. So ecological values, which are based on our understanding that the nature and biodiversity are elemental to our health. So sustainability of our natural world has been possible because of the nature. So if we go for reckless development, it is going to be detrimental to the values, ecological values, as in the name of development we generally do. We would be causing more damage to nature by activities like your deforestation and encroachment of forests. So for example, the metro project in Mumbai, the RE project we were talking of, so it was the same thing, disrespect to ecological values. And also in the name of sustainability, we generally go to the extent of greenwashing. So it is a deceptive practice where the companies or even the government exaggerate their actions and the impact on mitigating the climate change. So it provides a misleading information or making some unverifiable claims. So consumerism is another challenge, so that ignores sustainability, and it also ignores the harm that we are causing to the environment, so in order to meet our own greed. So in this backdrop, if we have to talk about this ethics of conservation and development, the philosophical perspectives of utilitarianism and deontology, what do they say? And the anthropocentrism and ecocentrism, what do they say? First, utilitarianism. So utilitarianism is a philosophy. So it is a ethics theory, which assesses the actions based on the consequences. The aim is to maximize the happiness or the utility. So utilitarianism might justify development over some strict environmental conservation under certain conditions. So from the utilitarianism perspective, first thing is about, it would evaluate any developmental project based on the net benefits to the society. That is, it goes for CBA, cost benefit analysis. This is what it goes for. So for example, constructing a dam might provide clean energy, water for irrigation and economic growth, and there might be some environmental damage, but utilitarianism says, okay, go ahead with the project because there are more benefits than losses. So the second thing about utilitarianism is, it is about the promotion of welfare. So in case of urban expansion, it might support building infrastructure to alleviate poverty, so to improve the living conditions, even if it means some environmental degradation happens. So what is this? This speaks about welfare of a large number of people. Thirdly, so utilitarianism recognizes trade-offs. So, but what it seeks to do is, minimize the negative impacts. So the main thing about it is, it recognizes trade-offs and reduce negative impact. That is what it aims to do. So it may sort of provide for, advocate for regulations and technologies that can mitigate the environmental damage, but go ahead with the project. Find a solution, go ahead with the project, but find a solution so that the damage is minimized. Okay. On the other hand, you have the deontology. So this focuses on rights, duties, moral principles. It does not care about the consequences. So when it comes to the rights and duties, it argues in favor of ethical responsibilities towards the future generations. So deontology is about rights and duties. Rights and duties. So towards the future generations, and also the rights of the species that are existing and flourishing, the flora, fauna, the right for them to exist. Secondly, it talks about the intrinsic value. Secondly, it is about the intrinsic value. So the nature has an inherent value independent of human utility. So emphasizing the duty to protect environment for its own sake, not for our sake, for the sake of the nature itself. Thirdly, it is about justice and fairness. It's about justice and fairness. So it is about equitable distribution of all the environmental benefits, the burdens. So it criticizes those actions that are disproportionately harmful to the to all the communities which become vulnerable because of our actions, right? So that is what deontology. So it is about three things: rights and duties, intrinsic value, and justice and fairness. And the next the next philosophical debate is between the anthropocentrism and ecocentrism. So anthropocentrism, it places the humans at the center. Anthropocenter, humans at the center of any ethical consideration. So human interests and well-being are of primary concern. So according to this perspective, the economic growth and development becomes more important than environmental conservation. So human welfare, according to anthropocentrism, emphasizes that improving the human quality of life through economic development is the most important thing. So all resources should be used to the benefit of humans, be it through industrialization, infrastructure building, or even urban expansion. So it sees the nature as an instrument. It sees the nature as an instrument. It has an instrumental value so that it can be used by the humans. So for timber maybe, for medicine maybe, for agriculture purposes, right? To get clean water, air, that's it. So when it comes to cost benefit analysis, decisions are often based on what? Weighing economic gains against environmental impacts. So anthropocentric approaches might even justify environmental degradations if economic benefits are outweighing the costs. So it is more like your utilitarianism. On the other hand, ecocentrism, it puts the ecosystem at the center of ethical consideration, and it directly challenges anthropocentrism. So this perspective views nature as having an inherent worth, just like we saw deontology. So independent of its utility to humans, it advocates for environmental protection. So what is this? This is about ecocentrism, right? So it takes a holistic perspective, the ecocentrist view. So it talks about the interconnectedness of all the ecological systems and the importance of maintaining the ecological balance, right? It is about the long-term sustainability, right? Fine. So that is about the ethical side, the ethical viewpoint. And finally, we'll conclude the concluding remarks. So, the debate on environment versus development, especially in India, reflects a critical point where decisions made today will have an impact, will shape the nation's future. For these things, for adopting this holistic approach, that prioritizes sustainable development, India can, of course, achieve economic prosperity while safeguarding the natural heritage, which is rich, so that we will have a resilient, future for the generations to come. So the key lies in inclusive decision making, coming up with innovative solutions, collaborative efforts to harmonize these conflicting demands of, on one side, the economic growth, the other side, the environmental preservation. So while India has over the years established a very comprehensive legal framework, what we need is strengthening of the institutions. So for implementation and enforcement face a lot of significant challenges. So because we have inefficiencies in the institutions, resource constraints, bureaucratic delays, economic pressures, and there is also political interference. So all of these reduce the effectiveness of our environmental governance. So the demand for industrialization, urbanization, keeps on growing. It will often lead to competition with environmental objectives, so resulting generally in the violation of crucial regulations. To address all these challenges, the judiciary, the government, the government agencies, the public participation must work collectively so as to ensure compliance and accountability. So strengthening these institutions, improving the data collection and the monitoring systems, right? Spreading social awareness and enforcing stringent mechanisms. These become all these become the critical steps to bridge the existing gaps. By fostering the cooperation among all the institutions and the society, India can, of course, manage its environmental issues quite effectively and, put a path, carve a path for sustainability in the future. So, when we speak about environmental law, it must strike a balance between development and conservation efforts. So, effective enforcement and having harmonized policies are very, very essential to ensure that the future generations inherit a very clean, healthy, and a sustainable environment. So, only through concerted actions from all the sectors can India achieve this equilibrium, a critical equilibrium, of course. Thank you.